day-to-day activities as a data engineer and as a data analyst. So we'll start off from what we have packaged for today. So basically, can we all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll run down
Yeah.
a basic introduction to ChatGPT, basically how to use ChatGPT, the pros and cons of GPT, and using ChatGPT for code generation. Then my personal experience, then generally talking about how to keep up with the tech evolution, just being a pro generally. So let's start with what ChatGPT is. So first off, does anyone have any opinions on what ChatGPT is? Could I have contributions, please? What do we think ChatGPT is? Um, okay, let's take Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. Hello. Okay, Chizaba.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Okay. So, from my understanding, ChatGPT is an AI tool that is used to generate content. But you can use it to generate code or even in content writing or anything.
Okay, so ChatGPT basically is a content generation tool. Okay. Any other opinion? That's valid. So any other opinion on what ChatGPT is? Okay. In absence of any other, I'll move to what I have here. So what exactly is ChatGPT? ChatGPT basically is a language model developed by OpenAI. OpenAI is an open source company that deals in artificial intelligence, uh, mostly sponsored by Microsoft. Uh, OpenAI developed ChatGPT based off one of their GPT models, which is GPT-2. And this is basically a type of AI model that has been trained on a large data set of human generated text, such as books, articles, websites, just generally human generated text content, text based content, not graphical content. So basically, any text based content and a really large data set of it. I think about 1.5 billion parameters were put in when training GPT-2, of which ChatGPT is based. And this allows it to generate text that is similar to what humans can write. So ChatGPT is a powerful language model, honestly, and it's mainly powerful because of the size of the data set that it has been trained on. This model is based on a transformer architecture. So a transformer architecture was introduced, I think, in 2017. Uh, yeah, in 2017, that's when the transformer architecture basically allows the model to process the text in a parallel manner, which means on multiple threads at the same time, it can process as much as possible, which makes it faster and more efficient. Additionally, the transformer architecture allows the model to generate text with a high degree of fluency and coherence because it's generating them in multiple folds. So basically, it generates way the neural network works is how your mind works, which is it picks the most likely thing or the closest thing that is likely and presents it. So it makes it because it's capable of generating text itself that is similar to what humans can write, gives you the capabilities of getting out content that seem human. So let's try and remember the core thing here is that it has been pre-trained. So the fact that it has been pre-trained is what gives it the ability to do what it does. So, and simply because it has been pre-trained, that brings one of the biggest flaws that ChatGPT has or can have. So we'll talk more about that. So basically, pre-training refers to the process of training a model on a large data set of text or whatever you decide to train it on. In this case, with ChatGPT, it's text before fine-tuning it on a specific task. So this allows it to learn general language patterns and representations that can be used for a variety of tasks. Um, Basically, given that, I would explain now what a transformer model is. So let's start with what exactly is ChatGPT and what it's not. So, as I've said earlier, ChatGPT is a language model, meaning it is for natural language processing, NLP. It's based off natural language processing. It is not full. It's not an autonomous AI that can understand context, which is one of the flaws that ChatGPT itself has. So it is a type of AI model that has been pre-trained. It is not a replacement for human creativity or expertise because human beings are required to first off put in the effort that we use to train this AI. And it uses a transformer architecture, which means it basically is just processing out the data it already has. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee the security or the privacy of the data it has processed. So, which also brings us to the fact that you should watch what you put into ChatGPT and not go ahead and put in so much personal information when working with ChatGPT because that will also be used to train and tune the model further. So, speaking of tuning, ChatGPT can be fine-tuned for various tasks. So, when we talk about fine-tuning, those inputs that you put into the quote unquote search box in ChatGPT is what you use to fine tune. So it picks your inputs and uses it and starts picking the most liable, the most suitable thing that it can pick out from there and fine tune it to give you a result. On that note, it cannot predict. It's not a prediction tool. It's not anything grandiose. So it's just basically a language model. So now, speaking of transformers, when we keep talking about the transformer architecture, so let's talk a little bit on the technical parts of ChatGPT itself, which are the fact that it's based off a neural network, and that neural network uses a transformer architecture. So let's talk about the fact that it's a neural network first of all. ChatGPT is based off a neural network. Is there anyone here that is into machine learning? Uh, we have hands. Can I see the show of hands if there's anyone here into machine learning? So far, I can't see anyone into machine learning, so I'll have to break down what I have here furthermore. So basically, neural network. A neural network is a method in artificial intelligence that kind of works the way the human brain works. So it uses a layered structure wherein it takes an input or it takes in multiple inputs and maps them to the most likely response, the most likely collection of connected units. So in your brain, basically, one cell, one neural cell fires another neural cell, which in turn fires another neural cell. So that whole chain reaction is what causes you to take a certain step or a certain action. So it's almost the same thing with uh, the neural network, upon which it uses there are different architectures for different kinds of neural networks. But we'll be focusing on the transformer architecture. So what exactly is the transformer architecture? So the transformer architecture is a neural network architecture that was introduced in a research in 2017, is designed to process sequential data such as text, speech, basically things that one thing comes after another. So the key idea of the transformer architecture is to use a mechanism called self-attention, which allows the model to weigh the importance of different parts of the input when making predictions. And that allows the transformer to effectively handle input sequences of varying lengths, from very short text to very long text, and to model long-term dependencies in the data. The transformer architecture is very effective when it comes to natural language processing tasks, which is why things like language translation, text summarization, answering of questions are the core functionalities of ChatGPT, because it is based off this transformer architecture, which uses sequential steps. So basically, it takes, okay, if you say in this from what you've said, from what I have seen before, when after A comes the word alphabet, after the word alphabet comes the word set, after set comes off, after off comes letters. So basically, um, that's how it works. The transform architecture takes in um, by one value and looks at the next thing. So it maps that out parallel over numerous inputs and takes out the most viable one to give you an output. So basically, the neural network uses a lot of mathematical, is basically a mathematical function that receives input, processes it, and produces an output. So the neural network basically are stacked together and have a wide range of applications. But here in ChatGPT, it's used mainly for text or natural language processing. So before we move on, how to work with ChatGPT or search using ChatGPT. If there are any questions, we could drop it in the chat, or that so I could take them as we go along. Okay, so now let's talk about generating tailored searches on ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT basically, there are two methods when it comes to using ChatGPT, which is first off, you need to input a specific prompt. Then after inputting a specific prompt, the next thing you should be looking at is using specific parameters and settings, which for the average user doesn't come in necessary. But by the time you start using ChatGPT to advanced levels, you'll start finding use for it. Now, I would share my screen on ChatGPT. So basically, to access ChatGPT, it's chat.openai.com. Most of us here might have used it at one time or the other. I'll get that out. Let me share my screen. Can we see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, you can see the
Okay.
screen.
So basically, I can input different kinds of prompts. So a prompt is basically a question that you ask it, or a statement that you make. So you could either make a statement or ask a question. So let me get out some examples for us. So for instance, I can say, um, day has been sunny. Now, this is going to be slightly unrelated, and we can feel the effects of global warming. and it starts to explain. So I didn't even ask it a question, I just made a statement. So it starts to explain because remember I said it gives the most likely response. So I can now further go down and say, how does this relate to today's temperature? So in as much as it gives correct responses, once you start to go logical, it's flawed. That's where some of the flaws come in because it doesn't take in context pretty well. So for instance, uh, let's see, trying to think of in a better scenario that would require more context. Okay, I think I have some from my past searches. So I don't know how many of us are very fluent with VBA, but basically I put in a VBA script and ask it to give me responses. And ChatGPT itself thrives on some of this when it comes to code completion. But asking it to write the code from scratch would give you very inaccurate responses. Because, for instance, in one of these, yes, it threw me off balance because it started giving me code that doesn't necessarily work in VBA. So, in this instance, ChatGPT is not exactly a tool to be used by someone without experience in a particular language. To use ChatGPT for code generation, which basically which basically would come into play when we talk about data automation and data collection and so on and so forth, you would need to have enough experience in that language or the in the tool that you're asking it to give you a response on. Because we go further down the line, we would see that it gave me bugs and even ChatGPT itself did what it does best, which is debug. Now, another thing that can also notice is when it breaks, you could easily tell it to continue and it will do that without flaw. Sorry about this, my keeps jumping. So, but basically, you could tell ChatGPT to give you specific. Sorry, could we see my screen? Hello, can we see my screen, please?
It's blank, like white, just showing
Oh,
white.
I'll stop
Yes.
sharing and share again. So let's just come back then. We can practicalize this. So I'll just come back to the slides while I explain. So you could use specific prompts, and ChatGPT will thrive. But when we start putting in things that require logic, things that require it to um, use context. Because of the fact that it's a language model, it doesn't thrive on doing those things. It's not a code completion. It's not a code generation tool. Rather, it's ideal for code completion and code documentation. So you could use it to document your code that you've already written, or if you are stuck with a bug somewhere, you could use it to debug. You could use it to generate um, a structure for your code. But relying on that code and throwing it out there would give you bugs. And this is tied to the fact that it is not a code based model, it's not for logical or contextual applications, which is mostly what hardcore software and basic coding requires for you to be able to put logic down and say if this is that then do this else do that. It doesn't thrive on that kind of logic because it gives you the most probable response. So along the line it will give you bugs and even the application ChatGPT, which when I say the application right now, would not even recognize that it has given you bugs because until you ask it again to debug the code, it will not recognize the bugs. And even when you tell it to debug the code, it might not give you an accurate response because it is a language model. So there are some specific parameters that ChatGPT uses, given the fact that it is a GPT, a general pre-trained transformer. So that's what GPT means, a general pre-trained transformer. So the options of some specific parameters, I can give some examples out of which I will explain how I've used some of them. So one of them is the model type. So the parameter specifies the type of model architecture to be used by ChatGPT. Remember, ChatGPT is open source, meaning there are some people that use the API for ChatGPT, and those are the people that will use things like model type. And you can say, basically, you call it by saying GPT, then in a parenthesis, model underscore type, then you can put either GPT-2 or GPT or control. Control in this sense is CTRL. So basically, GPT-2, ChatGPT is based off the GPT-2 model. So it's basically a smaller data set or a smaller size of the GPT-2 model. So when you call GPT-2 resources, so you can use it when you're building your own chatbot and piggyback on the ChatGPT API when it goes public. So for now, it's not fully public; it's for a limited set of users. But ChatGPT is going to go public soon. Now, while the GPT-2 and the control models are better suited for larger projects that require things that are more complex. So if you are not doing just a regular chatbot, but you want to do something like a chatbot for finance or something that requires more heavy duty like language translation and so on and so forth. So GPT-2 and the control models are the model types that are suited for you. And you could also specify the number of layers in the model's neural network. So the default value in ChatGPT currently is 12. So basically, for every outcome it's giving you, it's taking there are 12 different pathways that it could take, 12 different layers, and on each layer it has numerous pathways that it could take. So the more layers, the more complex the model is and the more data it's required to train. So ChatGPT itself uses 12 layers and you could specify way more than 12. So for people that want to go into building their own ChatGPT models, this is for you. Then number of heads and so on and so forth. But for those of us that want to stick with using ChatGPT as it is, we just want to enjoy it. Would also like to know about things like temperature and the temperature of the when you put in that ChatGPT should reduce or gives you so it can if you when you put temperature basically what it does for you is it affects the kind of outputs and how random the outputs you get is. So when you choose a lower temperature, I cannot remember the default temperature, but you could give it as an input that chat gpt should lower the temperature of the model and you get a response. So basically let me do that. I'm see my screen. I'm see my GPT screen.
No, I can't sit. No.
Okay, 1 second. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So because it's the temperature is low, it kind of gives you more less random stuff. So there are the people who tend to use who would tend to use ChatGPT the most are creatives basically because a lot of what we do, as I said earlier, requires logic. So except we're talking about things like writing documentation and debugging, that's where ChatGPT will do a lot of good as a techie. But for general stuff, it just comes in handy with a lot of creative activities. Sorry. What is the current temperature of the model? Now, this is why I said about lack of context. So the more you give it context, the better the response you get. And remember, they have already tried to lower the temperature parameter value already. I'm expecting it to give me some other weird thing as a response, as against what I asked it, because I've already tried to tighten the parameter already. So this is taking a while. So while it's taking a while, when it brings out the value, I'll get back to the screen. But let's move to other stuff. So aside temperature, which is the parameter that most of us would use. Also, another thing is asking it to um, give use cases. So if it's not giving you a response, you could put in more context and use cases, and that would help to guide the kind of response you get. So when it comes to different scenarios, now let's talk about the specifics on how ChatGPT can be used. So some examples of how you can use ChatGPT for code generation is when you already know the outcome you are looking for, but you don't exactly know the functions to use. Basically, you could just then tell it to literally write out the code. Then you could look through that code for structure, which is what I was trying to show us in here. Okay, in here when I opened the VBA code. Um, can we see my screen right now? Christ is king. I'm sharing the GPT screen. Can we see it? So I basically asked it to do a couple of things to solve the problem. So basically create a schedule for doctors using a particular grading heuristic. So basically, a greedy heuristic is a set of instructions, precise instructions on how to do something, and always choosing the best option at every stage. Now, it basically gave me the steps on what to do to write the code in VBA. So it said define the necessary variables and data structures. You need to store the list, blah 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 blah. And basically, these are things that are, yeah, they can guide you to write your code faster. So basically, if you do not know where to start from, with this you already know, okay, these are the possible steps I can take. So you could basically throw in the question that you want it to help you answer as is. Then I now prompted it again and said, follow the steps you recommended and write VBA code that does this, commenting and explaining your choices. And it did just that. So it explained and commented each step. But through this code around here, so when you say set patient equals to patients, so basically this will throw a bug in VBA, and it did throw a bug in VBA because you are trying to store a collection inside a variable, and VBA doesn't really like that because you are basically deeming this variable as a collection, as the collection that you've already declared, but you've not declared it's a collection. So further to merge the code, it did that. To merge the code, it did that. It broke, and I said continue. It continued where it stopped. So these are basic things that you could also use as you use ChatGPT on a daily basis. Now, another key thing is some ChatGPT will break. So if it finishes without giving you a sort of explanation, which is what I highlighted here, on what it has done, know that it's not done. So you could ask it to continue or something, or you could ask it to restart. Just basic instructions. It actually understands English because it's a language processing model. So because of the bug, I asked it what is the data type of this and whatnot. So I said, when I was explaining just now about deem patient as patient, that it will throw a bug. So he said user type not defined. So it saw its own bug and tried to solve it. But even after trying to solve it, it basically failed to solve it. So it's good at debugging even its own errors, but you have to logically be able to sit down, know what you want to do, and try to correct it. So this use case is for those that want to basically use it for code generation. Now, I also asked it a couple of things because I used Azure Data Factory, and it gave me accurate responses that no longer exist because it was trained, I think, with data from 2021, I believe. I yes, 2021. The data used to train. So anything after 2021, ChatGPT cannot give you an accurate response on it, especially things that have to do with modern happenings and so on and so forth. So this response it gave me about the limit of active triggers and pipelines in data for ETL processes in data engineering with using Azure Data Factory are outdated. So we should also bear in mind that the data here is from 2021 for any response that we get. So this was the first response it gave me. Maximum number of active triggers for a data factory is 10. Maximum number of active pipelines for data factory is 10. So I asked it for those that can run concurrently. Then I refined my response and it gave me, and it said active triggers are 50 and active pipelines are 50. So that's the difference of between each of them. It gave more context by the time I asked it to regenerate a response and so on and so forth. So if you don't like a response, you can ask it to regenerate as many times as you want. And it keeps fine-tuning it based on what it thinks you want. Remember that there are 12 layers. So basically, if it takes a path on the first try and you ask it to regenerate, oh, you don't like this path, it basically takes the next probable path. And it keeps going over and over again until you find what you want. And you can keep fine-tuning it by liking or disliking the answers and telling it this is the correct answer. when you tell it this is the correct answer, if you ask it that same question again, because it remembers the context that you have given it to fine tune it, it would basically take your own answer once again. So let's get back to our slides. And also, another use case before we go back to our slides has to do with those that want to use it for resume. So you could tell it to rewrite your resume and so on and so forth. So in this instance, I'm not a project manager, but I asked it to write a project manager resume for me, and it was able to bring up something that we're able to put out for use and fine tune it. I put in a resume and said it should outline this each of them. And he told me it is not appropriate to make hiring decisions, but I still basically pushed it to give me a response by telling him that it's or even though it says it's inappropriate to do that, it can actually um, do that. So basically, those are some use cases and some practical examples of how we can push this further. So let's get back to the slides and rush through. Any questions so far, please? Okay, so let me rush through. So next, we talk about the pros and cons of ChatGPT. From what I've said, I've mentioned some of these, but the pros is that it's very lovely for productivity in things that have to do with writing and telling you what to do, basically steps to take. So the reason why it can be used for a lot of things that have to do with data processing is because it can tell you, okay, these are the steps that you can take, as we saw in the VBA code that I wrote to process um, patient schedules and put them into doctor schedules and operating theater schedule for that VBA code. So it can save time and effort by automating repetitive tasks. So if there are things that you have to write over and over again, you could just throw them in things like documentation and so on and so forth. You could use them. You could use ChatGPT to do that. And but you also need to bear in mind that it is limited to the data that it has been trained on. And it can also be used to create fake stuff. So that's another concern that we should have. And as regards Chat GPT. So next, we also have using it for the workplace. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's not really good for code generation, but it's very good at writing and completing codes and code summarization, generating documentation, and basically writing a portfolio. So now let's talk about my own personal experience with ChatGPT. So I got to discover early that based on the fact that most of the data in there are not modern or are not recent. So a lot of tools that have been brought up to date are left out. So for instance, you are asking ChatGPT to help you generate code for DBT or some other data generation tool. It won't give you accurate information, but it will most likely throw you off balance, which brings me to the fact that it's more of a bug generator than a code generator. So you need a vast experience to be able to use it to comfortably generate code from scratch, as against um, as against completing code that you've already written. Now, experience with cybersecurity. So I am aware of the possibilities of using tools like ChatGPT to quote unquote um, generate code for things like writing of keyloggers and stuff. because there are a lot of common uh, knowledge about writing keyloggers and writing scripts to extract some information. Because I, for one, personally, I tried that when ChatGPT was still on the December 15th model. So ChatGPT has received an upgrade since it first came out in December, and it's currently on the January 9th model. So that was the first update after the December 15th model. So responsible use of ChatGPT, you cannot assure yourself that ChatGPT will be used responsibly. Because, for instance, I have generated a script, a Python script that extracts passwords from as long as that script is run on your computer. And that is not exactly a safe way that ChatGPT could be used. Right now, because of fine tuning. So the more people use ChatGPT for good things and call out the bad things that it has been used for, the less likely it will generate those kind of responses. So right now, it's harder to get ChatGPT to give you a response on those kind of scripts. But if you keep pushing, for instance, in my own case, I said it was for educative purposes, strictly for educative purposes, and generated the script just like that. But right now, it would still try to throw you off balance until you keep pushing. In the December 15th model, you could basically tell ChatGPT to switch to kernel mode. And once it does that, there is no bias, there is no limit to what it can do in terms of ethics. So all those limitations of this thing is ethically wrong. I am just a language model. I cannot do this. I cannot tell you. You should do it, basically. But right now, that brings me to the limitations of the model because it's a smaller model of 1.5. It's a smaller model, which is a subset of something that had 1.5 billion parameters. So ChatGPT doesn't have as many parameters as even GPT-2, which has 1.5 billion parameters. It is definitely limited in the kind of answers it can give in the terms of accuracy and conciseness. So ChatGPT is very limited in those senses. Now, next, we also will talk about looking ahead. What's the future when it comes to ChatGPT? So, what I see as the future for ChatGPT is the fact that based on GPT-2 is already available, I expect that in the next update for ChatGPT, we'll get more concise answers and more concise responses. And honestly, I expect that ChatGPT, given that it's open source, the GPT-2 model should be most likely paid for as against what's free right now. Currently, as it's free, there are a lot of downsides to it, and a lot of people don't even have access to it. Because sometimes if you use it, you see things like it's at capacity, so on and so forth, and it's not really the best use cases. And also, ChatGPT requires a pretty stable network connection. So if we could have something that is more open to shaky networks, and if it runs faster, that means it will be able to work on less stable networks. So looking ahead, I'm expecting that it would also be pushed into GPT-3. So before we move, let's talk about. I've mentioned GPT-3 a couple of times. So now just talk about some other models by ChatGPT. So we also have GPT-2 and GPT-3. So now GPT-2 basically is also capable of generating human text because it's also a language model. Both GPT-2 and GPT-3 are both language models, but ChatGPT basically is a smaller version of the GPT-2 model with a smaller, uh, the same architecture and capabilities, just a smaller version. So it's less likely to require much more. But GPT-2 can do everything ChatGPT can do, with slightly better fluency and coherence. But GPT-3 takes it to another level because it requires less fine tuning. GPT-3 uses, I think, about 17 billion parameters as against 1.5 billion parameters that Chat GPT, that GPT-2 uses. And they are both large-scale language models. But the advantage of GPT-3 is that it requires a smaller data set to fine-tune. So you need to give it less context, and it can be used for things like coding. So you can actually use, if ChatGPT should get built on GPT-3 as I'm predicting, it might be, an improvement its ability to generate code, and it would be able to provide justification for what it writes in its code as against just saying the advantages and disadvantages of why it's writing it. And you see a lot of accurate translations and reduced errors and so on. So it's based of ChatGPT itself, given that it's already within their architecture and it's already among their models developed by OpenAI. We should be expecting this soon. So let's just leave the whole concept of ChatGPT. I hope I've been able to talk more and give us some insights today on ChatGPT as a tool and as it stands within this about 45 minutes of me talking about ChatGPT. So now let's talk a little bit about staying relevant in tech in general. So some people feel that ChatGPT or these tools would quote unquote take people's jobs. And I'm here to boldly say no, because first off, these transformers, or as we or ChatGPT is a transformer, so it doesn't know anything. So it's basically garbage in, garbage out. So it is based on what you feed it that it gives you output, and it still cannot take in things like context and logic. And even when it's GPT-3, and let's say ChatGPT gets built up on the GPT-3 model, which is a larger scale model than what is currently built on, which is GPT-2, we are still expecting that it's not going to be a one size fits all solution when it comes to code generation. I still expect it to fail at code generation in things that require extra effort and logic for larger solutions. But when it comes to broken down tasks, ChatGPT might be able to handle that well when it comes to code generation on GPT-3. So it's really important to keep upskilling yourself as an individual, because as the the world is moving, we need to adapt to these future changes in technology. And another thing is also people talking about it as against what would have taken 3 days to write in Python. So it's also brings me to the point of being flexible and approaches. Imagine someone trying to build a website in this day and age using something like let me not even use a website. Let's say something as basic as a calculator, using something like assembly language. So it's going to take him years and so much time to write something as simple as a calculator, which is basically an introductory project in a tool like Python and some other scripting languages. So lastly, I'll talk about collaboration. So no man is a silo of knowledge. No one is a silo of knowledge. So to stay relevant, you would also really need to collaborate with other people. Put yourself out there, taking the extra effort of going online, tweeting about stuff, talk about what you do on platforms like LinkedIn, talk to as many people as you can, and if you need help, reach out to experts. So I was working on that VBA project recently, and I had to reach out to a couple of people who helped me out with the project, because I'm not an expert at VBA. What I write best, what I know how to do best is Power BI and Azure, using Azure tools. I'm not an expert at VBA. But I have a couple of guys who really know it, and I like my circle for that. So that's another thing about collaboration. You need to consciously network and build your circle. So basically, mm, I had a did you know in mind before. I can't exactly remember it, but basically, apart from um, yes, the concept of a transformer architecture was gotten from a book called All You Need to Know. I think it's All You Need to Know by Vasani. So if you're interested in things like machine learning, I'll recommend that you just go read the book. It's not really a large book, it's an article that was published in 2017. So that's where the concept of um, the transformer architecture. See all you need to know. Sorry, I'll get that the exact name of the um, academic paper and put in the chat and who wrote it. I'll get that out soon ASAP. So before the end of this call, I'll get that out. Um, so basically, the other models trained by OpenAI, GPT-2, GPT-3, and to stay relevant, I just have three tips to share. Network, put yourself out there, and challenge your today. So keep on adding to what you are today. Do your best today, but do better tomorrow. On this note, I would rest my case. Thank you very much for having me, and have a lovely week ahead. And I'll hand over the mic to Mr. Precious. Hi. Hello. Hello, Chizoba. Hello, over to you, Chizoba.
Hello. Hello. Thank you so much, Mr. Umunade, for your presentation. Hello. Can anyone hear me? Please confirm if you can hear
Yeah,
me.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Uh,
Um,
are there any questions, please?
yes, please. Yeah. So please, for every one of us who have listened to our speaker today, speaking about ChatGPT and the relevance, you also talked about the architecture and went ahead to show us some demonstration, and gave us really deep insight into what we should expect in future releases, GPT-2 and 3. So from everything that we have learned today, for what we've gotten, do we have any questions for the speaker? Any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. Thank you so much for the session. I actually learned a lot. So my question is based on the aspect of where you're like that. For someone to use ChatGPT, someone has to have like a reasonable knowledge about it. So I tried to use ChatGPT to do a Python code, and by the time I was me and the ChatGPT code and everything. So I wanted to ask if someone is still in that intermediate level in a language, would it be best to continue using ChatGPT or find, or what advice will you give someone? Because if you don't have mastery of that particular language, would ChatGPT be relevant to you?
Okay, so I remember mentioning that ChatGPT is not really good at generating code. But if you started writing your own code and you are stuck somewhere, it's superb at completing. It's superb at completion. It's superb at optimizing your own written code. But if you tell it to write code, it's more likely to give you a bug, which I was trying to joke when I said bug generation versus code generation. So if you are at a pro level, at a glance, you can tell that, okay, this code is not going to run. So you can start picking out from the structure of what ChatGPT has given you. You can use it to rewrite your own code. So when I use ChatGPT to write, so there I write DAX in Power BI. I tried using ChatGPT to write a DAX function to do something, and it immediately threw me a function that does not even exist in DAX. When I looked at it, I knew, oh, logically, looking at the code, it makes sense. It should run. But I knew that if I ran that code, it would not run because I have enough experience in it. So if you don't have enough experience to uh, in debugging in a certain language, it's advised that you write your own code or you ask ChatGPT to give you the steps to take, which was the first thing I did with that VBA code. So I first asked it to give me steps. So it gave me a step-by-step process to take. So that's a better approach to use. So you could do this instead. So let me come back to my ChatGPT screen and show you what you could do instead of. So can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I asked it to basically answer this question, and it basically gave me a step-by-step process to follow. So if ChatGPT gives you something like this, you can follow these steps and write the code out. So it can give you a direction to follow. But if it generates the code itself, you are most likely to end up with a bug. Because remember, it's a language model. So it doesn't really know so much about the context of what you are sharing or writing. So I hope that has helped you understand the context I meant.
Yes, thank you. I'll rather ask it for steps. Thank you.
Okay.
All
Any
right,
other
and
questions?
also keep in mind, what the speaker said, that the data that ChatGPT was trained on stops at 2001, 2021. Sorry. So that means that if, for example, you are asking questions related to new technologies, you may not really find suitable answers for your questions. All right. Do you have any other questions from anyone? Okay. So this just so would you pay for Chat GPT, Mr. Speaker? Would you
Yes,
pay for
gladly,
Chat GPT?
gladly.
And
So
why
so
why would you pay for it?
so basically, it saves me the stress of coming up with a lot of things from scratch. So right now, it has made me lazy, I'll be honest. I hardly write things from scratch. So basically, I give it enough information as I have and ask it to write for me. So when it writes for me, I then take that and fine tune it. So it saves me the stress of writing from scratch. One of the key things I've learned in the past 2 months is ChatGPT plus Grammarly equals to a perfect write-up. So I would actually pay for ChatGPT.
That's awesome. So how much would you like? I know they released the pro version. I know they just withdrew it. I think recently,
Yeah.
2 days ago. Yeah. So I think they were pegging it at 42 US dollars per month. So would you say that's a good price for you if you were to
Honestly, for me, it's
okay,
too
have a price
expensive.
model?
Honestly, for
Okay.
me, $42 per month is too expensive because I don't really. use it to do as much as I would have. But if I would have to pay $42 per month for ChatGPT, I'll use it to do more. I'll be forced to use it to do more. But say 9.99, like the usual $9.99 per month, which is what most of us pay for most of our subscriptions. Yes, I can. And another reason why $42 is too much, most Naira cards cannot even do $20, can barely do $20 per month. And with all these
Yeah,
subscriptions I keep up with, it's not going to be worth the stress. But
yeah.
at 9.99, I can consider canceling another subscription for it. Yeah.
So thanks for your inputs. Do you have any questions from others? So we have just posted a link on the chat. Please give your feedback about this webinar. When giving your feedback, give your feedback about our speaker, about the topic, and how we can improve in our subsequent webinars. And then also, if you like us to share the slides with you from this webinar, please also fill out that feedback form. And if you'd like to receive invites for subsequent webinars, please register with the link bit.ly/TGLP webinar. You can find that link on our Instagram page or our YouTube channel in the description box under the live stream of this current webinar. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think it's safe for us to say thank you so much. Please don't forget before you leave the meeting, open the link, it's in the chat, and fill up the feedback form so that we can have your feedback and improve on our subsequent webinars. Thank you so much, Mr. Umunade. I hope I got the pronunciation right.
Yeah, you did.
All right. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone that joined today. We hope you learned a lot, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you in our subsequent webinars. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.